Okay, I am going to get started now. Um, just wanted to start by saying a big welcome to all of you to the third event in the Pandemic Response Reading Series. We have 7 or 8 more coming up, so please do check out the website and I'll give you that address in a few minutes. We are coming together within a virtual realm, of course, but I would like to start by acknowledging that we all physically exist on land that is the homeland and traditional territories of many First Peoples and Indigenous nations, including Treaty 1 territory, where we're broadcasting from. Ariel Gordon and I are here, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. So we want to pay our respects in that way. A little bit of housekeeping about Zoom. I'm sure many of you have been using it lots in this time. And you know, this is a webinar, which is when we first started doing this, it was a little bit different. People were wondering why they couldn't see themselves because it wasn't a meeting, but it's a webinar. Feel free to use the chat throughout if you want to communicate with other people or drop comments. That is fine. Be sure to change that little blue bar to all panelists and attendees if you want everyone to see your comment. Otherwise, the panelists' comments only come to us, as I've said. So I will be popping off once Ariel comes on, and I'll be monitoring the chat as well. So if you have any questions or concerns or anything, just put them in there and I'll be able to see them and help you if you need assistance. At the end of the readings and discussion, there will be a Q&A session, and there's another feature down at the bottom, a Q&A feature, where you can pop your question in if you like. You can also raise your hand, but and speak your question if you're more comfortable with that. I will repeat that when we get to that section. Briefly about the Pandemic Response Reading Series. I started this series to bring some attention to books that otherwise wouldn't, get very much attention. It's been great to see so many virtual events happening, of course. So this is just one thing amongst many, which is fantastic. The Folds Festival of Literary Diversity it has started up with online events, and if you haven't checked them out already, do that. There's a bunch of stuff going on starting Friday, I think it is, possibly tomorrow. I've signed up for a few too through the weekend, so that looks amazing. If you want to find out about the next events, though, please go to my website, which is laurencarter.ca, and you'll see PRRS up at the top menu bar. Click on that, and that'll bring you to all the events, including the University of Alberta's Poetry Literary Cocktails event. I'll be hosting that on May 14th, which is their 4 new poetry books. Including Angeline Schellenberg's, who was the very first reader for the series. Next week, we have Sarah Enns launching her beautiful book, The World is Mostly Sky, gorgeous cover, in conversation with Jeanette Lines from Saskatoon. So that should be fantastic. So please do come back for that. Okay, I have said my piece. Without further anything, I'm going to introduce you to our very own, Winnipeg's very own guest host and vivacious, beautiful person, Ariel Gordon. She is the author of 2 fine collections of poetry published by Palimpsest Press, both of which won the Lansdowne Prize for Poetry at the Manitoba Book Awards. She is the ringleader for Rites of Spring, a National Poetry Month project that sees a beautiful spread of poetry each spring in the Winnipeg Free Press. And of course, her latest book is Treed, Walking in Canada's Urban Forest, which was published by Woolsack and Wynne. So Ariel, I invite you to come back on. I'm going to scoot out and leave it in your hands. And don't forget to unmute yourself.
I did.
Okay.
All right. Can everyone hear me? All right. So Lauren, can you let me know in the comments that you can hear me? I cannot see myself, so I'm just making sure.
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. And you can see me as well?
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
good.
I can see you.
Good. Well, hello everyone. I'm so glad to be here. I've got my balcony door. I'm in my bedroom. I got my balcony door open and I can still hear kids outside doing what kids do outside on a nice day in April. Is it April? Oh my God. For a moment couldn't remember if it was April or May. Anyways, I'm so pleased to be here. We're going to have a great evening of poetry with collections from poets that are really hitting their stride. They're sort of doing their best work right now. And I'm so glad that I get to be a part of celebrating it with them. So how this evening is going to work is that Claire Caldwell will go first. She will read poems from her book Gold Rush, which I have here. Isn't it beautiful? And then after she's finished, I'll come back on. I'll introduce Robert Colman, who will be talking about his book, Democratically Applied Machine. And I do not have his book yet, but his book has been described as the orangest book ever. So I am holding up the orangest thing in my room, which is this pot of succulents. So he will hold up his own book soon, I'm sure. All right, I'm back. So why don't we get started? Oh, and at the very end, after Robert has read, we will have a Q&A, as Lauren has mentioned. I'd like to remind you to use sort of like either the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or you can do that hands up thing where you get to talk. What I like about these events is that they kind of feel to me like being at a real event, at a book launch, at a bookstore. And part of that is the chats. So if you've got anything you want to say, think of it as this lovely undercurrent of chit chat. And I think the poets would really like it if you had any responses to what they were reading or what they were saying or how cute they are. Not that that's why we come to these things, but poets are beautiful people. So, all right, I'm going to start. I'm going to read the book description for Claire's book. I'm going to read her bio, and then it's going to be her talking. So, here we go. From the Klondike to an all-girls summer camp to the frontier of outer space, Gold Rush explores what it means to be a settler woman in the wilderness. Drawing on and subverting portrayals of nature from Susanna Moody to Cheryl Strayed, Caldwell's poems examine the tension between the violence and empowerment women have often sought and found in wild spaces. This is the violence young girls inflict on each other, colonial violence perpetrated by white settler women, violence against nature itself. Many of these poems portray a climate in crisis, suggesting that even wilderness buffs are complicit in climate change. Whether they're trekking the Chilkoot Trail, exploring the frontiers of their own bodies and desires, or navigating an unstable, unfamiliar climate, the girls and women in these poems are pioneers in all the complexities contained by that term. Now, I like this book, and Claire, mostly Claire, and, well, I like them both equally, but I feel like I will know Claire longer than I might know this book. And so she asked me to blurb it, and I did, and I was so pleased to do that. But I will save my blurb for when you buy the book, and you can read it yourself. Now, Claire Caldwell, this is her official bio, is a writer, a children's book editor at Anik Press, and a kids writing workshop facilitator. Her second poetry, Gold Rush, is available now from Invisible Publishing. Her debut, Invasive Species, Woolsack and Wynne, was named one of the National Post's top 5 poetry books of 2014. Claire was a 2016 writer in residence at the Burton House in Dawson City, Yukon, and the 2013 winner of the Malahat Review's Long Poem Prize. She lives in Toronto, and she is coming to us from a room full of bikes. Claire.
Hi everybody. Thank you so much, Ariel. So good to see everybody in the chat and to feel your virtual presence. And I'm very glad to be here. I am indeed coming to you from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, along with being home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. The opportunity to write this book and to have the experiences that informed it and to be here with you tonight is such a huge privilege, and it's a privilege that is made possible by the stewardship and generosity of Indigenous communities across the country. So I'm very grateful for that. And I also acknowledge my role as a settler, which is something that I explore in this collection, Gold Rush, which is my newest book. As you heard a little bit in the description that Ariel read for you. So I thought I would start by reading a woman in the wilderness poem, but one of the sort of fun things that I was exploring while writing this book is kind of expanding that definition of wilderness. So while there are many poems in Gold Rush that are about, backcountry camping trips, canoe trips, forests, rivers, mountains, there's also a lot of more city-based poems, and I think, for me at least, a lot of my outdoor experiences take place in the city, my encounters with nature, and as well as on the internet in virtual spaces. So I thought I would read a poem that kind of touches on that broader idea of wilderness. It's called The Wilderness Online. While the TSA trains birds to attack drones in protected airspace, a sales associate at a suburban Nissan dealership feeds quinoa to Eastern cottontails, hot lunch for the Falcons 9-to-5ing it at air traffic control. 3 test drives later, the associate embarks on the eat, pray, love of underwear shopping. It's raining vaccine-laced M&Ms in the mall parking lot, which approximates a prairie. Where's the dating app full of park rangers with helicopter access and glorified Nerf guns? She's supposed to root for the black-footed ferret, not the flea-borne plague. Home, she's relieved to be alive in the age of the potato with the Ryan Gosling chin. Tabs proliferate like giant hogweed. She lies down in the green blush of a Norwegian wildlife refuge. Streaming on her laptop. Population 3 roe deer and a bean goose named Ruth. She'll meet them in the apocalypse. Bicycle, shipping container, seeds for trade. Night slops into her condo like crude oil. She waits for the sun to swipe her awake. Thank you. So kind of paradoxically, part of, well, maybe not paradoxically, but part of, I guess, what drove me or inspired me to write about women in the wilderness specifically, aside from, my own subjective experience as a woman and someone who spends time in the outdoors, is a sense of exclusion or of pigeonholing of women's voices in those types of narratives. And so I guess the paradoxical part is thinking about that lack of perspectives or the sort of the voices that I wanted to hear made me also think a lot about the voices that you do hear a lot, and some of those are quite dominant kind of male voices. So I thought I would read 2 poems that kind of explore that more masculine side of the outdoors and some of the attitudes that I was thinking about or that I've encountered before. So this one is called The Hillary Step is Gone. The Hillary Step is gone. Evers just ain't the same. In the good old days, we fashioned crampons from the jaws of nurse sharks, imported elephant spines to lay across crevasses. We huffed through beluga lungs until they puckered like used condoms, then sent them jellyfishing off to China. Wind was an older brother, his knee on your neck, head in the toilet, flush. But we weren't pussies. Grew chest hair thick enough to weave into thermals, roasted pack mules at base camp, cured leftover intestines for rope. The math is 1 death per 100 feet, but the summit's been going downhill for decades. Now all a guy has to do is fall asleep. Our reputation's scarred by Gore-Tex mummies, oxygen canisters that'll last long enough for archaeologists to assume we were deep sea divers. But we earned this, the right to stand on the Earth's most flamboyant cowlick, poke selfie sticks in its scalp like pins. What's the point of a mountain if we can't climb it? Who else can we blame if we don't make it down? Thank you. And this one is called Homestead Rescue, and it is based on a reality TV show with the same name. Maybe some of you have seen it. Give me your cracked foundations, your chainsaw accidents, your decapitated hens. Give me carbon monoxide poisoning, water tank contaminated by a family of leering possums. I'm the patron saint of failing homesteads, and I've come with my camera crew. I've brought my son a felled larch hewn into muscle, my daughter cut from a lynx's womb. She'll rip apart your sibling rivalry to make space for a meat smoker. He'll strip the tree limbs throwing tantrums on your roof. Firewood or fourth wall for your outhouse? We'll prep you to survive the winter, but only if you shriek before commercial breaks. You own everything between bedrock and sharp-shinned hawk, and you're still hungry? That's embarrassing. Show me your palest offspring. I'll fill him with buckshot lust, force him to field dress a doe. The more he cries, the higher the ratings, but don't worry, I'll pull the trigger. This is TV. We need to kill something. Thank you. And thank you so much for all the lovely comments that I'm just seeing flying past. It's a very nice little boost to see that in between poems. So last week I tuned into the previous installment of this reading series for Joanna Lilly's launch of her book Endlings, which is about species that have gone extinct. And that was an amazing event. It was so great to hear Joanna's poems, and there was some great discussion from some experts on extinction, which was really cool. But I thought I wrote a few poems about animals in this collection, many of them either endangered and or extinct. So I thought I would read a few of those animal poems, starting with this poem, which is dedicated to the bramblecay melames, which was the first mammal to become extinct due to human-caused climate change. And it went extinct in 2015. And the bramblecay melames is a small rodent, and it was living on an island between Australia and New Guinea. Last night on Earth. First moon in claw time, second moon swinging from the silver tree. Ocean a tail's length closer, cheeks full of purslane, no pink pups to feed. Where has the sand gone? Shark bones croon to their brothers. Loggerheads circle strips of land in their teeth. Black rocks be like clouds and blow here. Coral become bridge. Petrels light on this russet spine and lift. And then bringing things a little closer to home, this is a poem for some formerly local animals. It is called For the Toronto Zoo Elephants. We never expected them to leave. No matter how often our talent bolted for California, we took it personally. Wasn't the moon the elephant's footprint? Didn't we give their babies names? We married beneath arches carved to imitate the Stonehenge of their bellies, groomed ski hills till they were firm as ivory, taught novices to tuck poles up like tusks. We didn't visit much in winter, except when the Crochet League broke into their enclosure, rolling chunky wool over trunks like pearled prophylactics. The public radio station broadcast their first day at the sanctuary. Our windshields buzzed with trumpeting. How could they sound so joyful when it was our sky that matched their skin? Snow penned us in. 3 elephants worth of wet confetti from Scarborough to Kipling. Thank you. And then the last poem that I'm going to read seems kind of appropriate for the current moment that we're living through, when a lot of us are connecting virtually and, you know, conducting our relationships at a bit of a distance, including this event tonight. So this one is called Dear Space Boyfriend. You're lagging. In the absence of video chat, I've posted thirst traps across the Great Lakes, typed DMs into Superior's waves. By the way, I've heard the Canadarm can personalize any river, curl it like a silver chain. For my birthday, I'd like the St. Lawrence to spell my name. Space boyfriend, there's an ozone between us, but I'm more tethered than ever. Last week in Alaska, a black bear crashed through a skylight into a pile of cupcakes. I know how hard you've worked to be weightless. It's just, shouldn't microgravity make your heart pump harder? I've turned on read receipts, 2 bright checks above our starless city. Use them to navigate. I want you to kneel on the atmosphere's glass floor until it breaks. Thank you so much. That is it for me. Thank you to Lauren for creating this series and supporting all of us who are launching books in this very strange season. It's wonderful to be able to connect this way with readers, with other poets, and with the community. It's amazing. Thank you so much to Ariel for all your wonderful words and for hosting us tonight. And thank you for sharing the Zoom stage with me, Robert. I can't wait to hear your poetry and to read your book. Congratulations, and thank you everyone for being here. It has been great, and I will now turn things back over to Ariel, and I'll see you in the Q&A.
All right, I believe I am back. So that was just beautiful. And some of the comments were saying, you know, I love the comments that were scrolling by. Unflinching was one of the adjectives, but also I think lyrical and beautiful and perceptive. And yeah, I really love that. And it's such the one thing that I like about readings and in person and online is being able to hear the work in the author's voice, to hear their phrasings, to hear how they make that language sing. It's really a treat, and it's one of the reasons that I go to readings, and as many as I can. So next we are going to hear from Robert Colman. I'm so pleased to be introducing him because my first 2 books came out with Palimpsest Press, which is a great press in Windsor, and we shared an editor. So my last book, Jim Johnstone edited, and he also edited Robert's book, so that's kind of neat. So we're press mates, as well as sharing an editor, which is not like sharing a space boyfriend, let me tell you. So this is Robert's third book. I'm going to read you the book description. I'm going to read you his bio, and then he's going to read. But in some ways, you might think that these two books, Claire's and Robert's, are very different. But they share, in some ways, these really interesting points of connection. And so I'm really looking forward to talking to you about it and seeing what you notice about it as well. So let's just dive right in. Robert Colman's third book of poetry, Democratically Applied Machine, is a back-to-basics approach to creation. In poems that inhabit both industrial and domestic landscapes, Colman traces his inheritance to determine how his life echoes that of his forebears, even as the past blurs with the onset of his father's Alzheimer's dementia. These are poems with working parts, poems of lineage and legacy, poems that engage the mechanical world while retaining nature's imprint. Democratically Applied Machine is a defining collection from one of Canada's finest poets. Now, Colman, I'm sure a lot of you know him already, but I'm going to read his official bio. Robert Colman is a Newmarket, Ontario-based writer and editor. He has been an editor of trade publications for the manufacturing industry for more than 10 years. Colman is the author of two other full-length collections of poetry, Little Empires, which came out with Quattro Books in 2012, and The Delicate Line, which was with Exile Editions in 2008, and the chapbook Factory with Frog Hollow Press in 2015. Now, I know my question here is, did they make, when one of, I forget which press it was, but it was either Frog Hollow or another sort of boutique chapbook publisher. When they did his chapbook, they got him to donate a bunch of his pairs of jeans, and they made the cover from that. So Robert, in this era of Zoom meetings that happen where people are not wearing pants or walk through the frame without pants, I want to know if your cover was made out of your pants. And with that, I will bring Robert Colman to the screen.
Hello, Ariel. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I can't see. Yes? Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My book was not made with my own genes, but that's okay. Awesome. I can't see. Well, I can see myself there. Hello, everyone. Just want to show you the cover of my book, Democratically Applied Machine. I want to get my thanks out of the way first. I want to thank you, Lauren, for setting this up. It's a great series. Ariel for hosting, Claire for being here tonight. And of course, Palimpsest, Amy, Jim Johnstone, the whole team there who made this happen. It's a beautiful book. It was printed at Coach House, so it feels beautiful too. Makes me feel really good. So thank you for everything you've done to make this happen. I'm going to start with a couple of poems. Basically the first and the show us that interior page. There you go. That's the orange inside too. I'm going to start with the first and the last poems that were written for this book. And the first poem that I'm going to read was the last poem I wrote. And it's, I got to the end of this book and I thought, I want a poem that will bring everything together in some vague sort of way, nothing too obvious, but something that brought in a lot of the different themes. And I was pondering this, and all of a sudden this painting by Gerhard Richter popped into my head called Landschaft bei Koblenz, Landscape near Koblenz, which hangs in the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Montreal. It's one of my favorite paintings, and for some reason that inspired this work. And it's called Middle Distance. Middle Distance. Pure dark, you think, could exist there, haven of the animal catalog, expanse of feral lung. But this bucolic only feigns breadth. Air dissembles the confluence ahead, in cloud funk, a tang of aluminum, gas, a boat, a barge. Sure, earth as well, but the city breathes hot on your wolf search, claws glossed. On the hill, you are both not far enough and too close. The problem, Gerhardt, is that your hill is our heaven of non-committal, echo-edged trees, the hayfield we can't quite see, a memory heat we can't glean, thock of clogs on cobbles, vowels stretched open on a spinning mule, the pitch of rough-cut steel on a lathe. Sounds we hasten from, are saved from? Muted, the soft-eye view confuses the two, becomes other. In his exiles, homeland, memory, Father gives me pieces of willing loss, our tools, phantom limbs. We can forget so much, the pain has no name. So that was the last poem I wrote for the book, and this is the first poem I started writing for this manuscript, but also the last I finished, because it took a long time to make the structure work and make it not too rhymey, but also work within a structure where you have a lot of echoes and that sort of thing. And it talks a lot about manufacturing, which is what I do I talk about on a day-to-day basis. And it worked its way into my poetry starting about 8 years ago, when this was the first inkling of that. It's called Ghosting the Assembly Line. Watch the car's body trundled into place, hands blurred, houring the births. History. Quaint now, all those mouths that drawled parts, paychecks, dinners, flatware sets. As if our revolutions could still be fashioned, wrench on wrench, turned in unison. Take the minutes now, transcribe notes, penned up the line, white lab coats. Sketch the fingers that tool intention, lean, Kanban, black belts framed above large workstations, intricate knots, each in action, the clean line abstracting passion. The robots wave a greeting. Hear the hum, secondhand vibrato accent of the job shop floor. Work is done in smallness, one part, four, more is required as operator, accountant, time hoarder, one man a workforce awaiting the order, more like us every day. Palms alighting on keyboards, milling down the hours into scrap. Now, I started writing a bunch of poems about manufacturing, and a lot of them were very manufacturing themed, about being in shops and seeing machines run and that sort of thing. But eventually there were some certain words that I wanted to add to the manuscript, and I sort of wrote a list of them down. And instead of trying to define it, I just started to write a poem. And this is what happened. So it's called Cutting for the Layman. 1. Mill. Absence isn't synonymous with lack. The lock's body, mouths of empty cups. The time before diagnosis, considered hollows, 2, turn, every tussle a circle. Fat snow of words funneled to choice line. Shouts cowed by doubt, return to where we began. Flushed, renewed, less of us, better, not lack. Driver pins poised to move through the lock's body. 3, drill as our body's key love. Compulsion in double time, wanting in and through. Desire a word in the next room, how we see ourselves for, tap in threads, an anchored conclusion. That next room, her story on a childhood hillside. The cup I retrieved from it, slipped gently into a pocket, another tumbler placed. Excuse me. As I started writing this, I was taking my master's at UBC and started getting introduced to a lot of form poetry, and I'd never written a lot of form poems before. And I was introduced to the Sestina, and I thought, I'll never write one of these. Awful. Who would do this to themselves? And I'm not going to go into an explanation of the form, except that it has 6 lines in each stanza, and you have to use certain words in each one. And I really avoided it until I watched Michelangelo Antonioni's film La Notte, And the more I thought about that film, the more I realized that the form fit an exploration of it perfectly. And so eventually I just gave in, and this is what happened. It's called The Party. The excuse for abandon is a torrent of water. A train passes. He stands in the road, and on the car roof, rain lays a braid, twining endlessly the hood, the door. The rain is presence separate from sky, every man, woman who just can't in its hold. It repeats in him that jingle to have and to hold until it is nonsensical bump, a drumming of water drops become a child's chant to the summer sky. Through traffic lights in the city's heart, he rode the words to silence, tried to ignore his want to adore vaguely someone. Soft nap of braid on a new young woman, a braid he sniffs like a vampire and aches to hold like the sexually possessed teen he isn't now. Dormouse claws on the body of a skulking water rat. Scrub has buried the familiar railroad ties. This is no longer his sky. He can't picture it now, the skyscraper arrogance his romance owned. He abraded the sentimental years ago, watched anger erode his fellow feelings. He thought its last hold had disappeared, passed like water at a drunken party. But maybe there is a trapdoor that opens as his host lover leaves him on the doorstep and walks away into the house's maze. Whiskey breath fogs his head, but his shadow floats in the water-clear stillness of a fountain. One ripple would upbraid his body, and all the errors he can't stop holding would be erased and allow him to selflessly erode. Ha! Wouldn't he love that? Probably no. He outrode romance. He goes to find his wife. Love is fealty, is a dormant memory of the axe sometimes, have hold, knotted among the branches, shot through the musky rot of dawn as he walks next to her, taut braid of them, while their oaths and curses flame to water. The film corrodes. He knows the sky sounds of leaves, but is also door, time, river's braid, ego. Theirs holds shakily at the waterline. Thank you. So weird not hearing the audience, but I can see the comments. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. This is very strange to be just listening to myself, actually. It's very not what it's nice that I know you're there, though. I've got a couple more poems in the last section of the book. The last section of the book are poems that are inspired by a trip I took with my dad to England early on in his, when he was sick with his Alzheimer's. And this poem deals with an L.S. Lowry painting. L.S. Lowry captures working class people in Britain in his paintings, and he's a painter that both my dad and I really love. The painting, Salford. You never see the machines, only smoke, red brick chimney, Stockport viaduct, a stadium. Not strict landscape. No landscape precisely this in Lancashire, but Lowry and Dad agree to it. The shape fits a winnowing. Pedestrians gather for a portrait, then forget. Whose hat is this? Whose pipe? Is he a soldier? Dad squints at the white-gray sky. A horse cart trundles away, familiar. Has the crowd thinned? Dottered off? He falls asleep into a knowing which is more poetry than fact, now that facts are ricochet. The elisions fuse shut. A scumble sets new streetscapes, make him safe. Dad, describe it to me. I'm just going to finish off with a cento. I wrote one cento per section, and for those of you who don't know, centos basically you take lines from other writers and make a new poem out of them. And so what I did with this one was I found a bunch of poems that had the word father in them, and I turned them into something new, and it was kind of fun and kind of surprising, and this is what came of it. This is called Watching. When he had fallen deep asleep and was snoring, when the baby face, an old serious one tarnished in the moistness, gone small, thin salt and blind with tears. What a life he would have lived without them in this democratically applied machine. He hid behind books, and thunder lay down in the heart. Everything is lost in the fire and lost in the gauging. Fire he will grope back into and crouch down. Thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate this opportunity again. Lauren, this is amazing. And Claire, what a beautiful reading you gave. And thanks everyone for being here.
All right, Claire, do you want to come back as well? That was beautiful, Robert. And I kind of wish you were, could you read it? I want you both to read more. I want you to read like 6 more poems a piece. And then I will be ready to ask you questions. All right, so does anybody have any questions? Oh, we have a request, I think. Whale Hunt.
Oh, it's another poem of mine, yeah.
Claire, do we want to, I mean, if you get someone asking you to read a poem, you have to let the audience have their way. So can you read it? Would you be prepared to read it?
Well, I'm not going to be like mean. My ego's big enough that I'll totally read however much you want. Okay, so this was inspired originally by going into a manufacturing plant and a guy holding up a part for an airplane and saying, if this breaks, you die. And my wife was there, who really hates flying to begin with. So I was like, why do you have to do that, man? That was not cool. But for some reason, it turned into a poem about whales. So don't ask. Whale Hunt. We ask you to pull us further from land, harpoon snug in your side, seal bladder ballast above you. We ask after we leap from our boats and pierce your flesh, carry our skiffs as far as your might allows. Let me roll my bones, clack the dominoes back in place. There is not one Leviathan we do not love unto death. Who drew whom into the deeps? Wasn't everything necessity? I carved a compass on a scrimshaw box because direction was all I could think. Wind and currents in your back as it breached. If I must now put away my blade, I would still follow you. All the tow ropes stretching unseen from bulwark and mast, cliffside and the gaff sail of earth pounded solid this doorway. Thank you.
Do the last line again. What's the last line?
Oh, sorry. Oh, it's terrible. Oh, there we go. Cliffside and the gaff sail of earth pounded solid this doorway.
Yeah, beautiful. Claire, I saw a request for your Grizzly Lake Trail.
Sure, I can do that. Yeah. Also, I appreciate that whale hunt poem so much. And in my first book, there's a long poem about a dead whale. So we do have that in common.
There you go.
Okay, let me just find it here. All right. Grizzly Lake Trail. There are risks we failed to calculate. Rust fungused rose hips, mineral deficient ground squirrels craving shoelaces. 20-year-olds trail us in Chuck Taylors, stretched sweaters, Jansports sloshing with cans of PBR. We're not moms, but we were camp counselors. We worry about wicking layers, supportive boots. The valley bloats with invisible grizzlies, a boulder field of broken ankles. Vegan hot dogs sweat in our bear-proof canister for a dozen clicks. We pass a single dad from Coquitlam who thinks the sun shines out his dromedary bag. He shares unsolicited waterfall pics, brags about his preteens while they negotiate the talus, how they don't carry any extra weight. At the communal campsite, a fever unzips my sleeping bag. I try not to throw up in the protected ecozone. Don't make it. 2 older women who've been hiking together since we learned to walk gift me a thermos of broth, a sleeve of electrolytes. The Jansport girls sweetly offer toothpaste, pot. 3 Advil get me back to the trailhead where the car won't start. Thank you.
Oh, beautiful. So I had sort of a question. I mean, in some ways, your collections look like they're about very different things or very different sets of concerns. But I kind of want to ask you both about the role of masculinity and in these books. So how does that operate for you, or how does it not operate for you? Like, was that something that you took up? Was these sort of gendered spaces, or how gender is performed? Yeah, that's my question.
Well, I can start. I think for sure, masculinity and obviously gender roles really factored into my, I guess I think if you set out to write about, especially about maybe how women are represented or underrepresented in certain spaces, it seems you're not writing into an empty space. You're writing into a space that's been shaped by other voices, in this case often male voices. So and I also think a lot of the roles that I was exploring of women in these wild spaces have either been prescribed by gender roles, masculine and feminine gender roles, or are kind of trying to subvert those roles. And I'm interested in how women can subvert gender roles without necessarily, just taking on a masculine role. So that is kind of something I was interested in playing with. And as I think hopefully people heard in the two poems I read that were kind of from a more male or masculine perspective, I do like to play with that kind of exaggerated male voice and kind of try that on. It's just, yeah, it's playful for me in a way.
I don't think I was thinking about that. I wasn't thinking about it directly very often. Like, for instance, I wanted to write a really good poem about women in the manufacturing industry, and I managed to eke out one poem that is good, but I wasn't thrilled with anything else I tried to do around that. And there were some other themes around that I wish I'd done. I wish I'd managed to get poems that I liked enough to put in the book. But yeah, it was a really interesting one too. And hearing people read a couple of the poems that I have in this that were a little bit more like out and out sort of that uber masculine aspect in them. There aren't that many like that, but there are a couple where the language is sort of like over the top because it uses language very specific to like pipe welders or something like that, and they have a language of their own. So it comes across as that sort of over the top masculine that I think comes across in that. And I wasn't even really aware of it, but when I read it to other people, they're like, why is he calling his welding machine she or whatever? And I'm like, oh, I don't think about that. But yeah, so it was interesting doing manufacturing poems to deal with that sort of issue and other things around it.
Yeah, I mean, and your book description says that the poems inhabit both this like industrial and this domestic space. So
right.
Was there more of an interplay with wanting to include both of those spaces? If it wasn't, do you know what I mean? Like, I guess where's the tension, I guess, between industrial and domestic then for you?
Well, for the industrial for me was the fact that we don't really see it very often, or sort of divorced from it. And so I feel like, especially like in that poem, Cutting for the Layman, it's sort of in a way trying to bring the romance back into the language and stuff like that. And so it feels closer to us. So it feels like, because it shouldn't be divorced from who we are in our day-to-day lives. I mean, we depend on all these things around us to survive in our domestic sphere. So why don't we think about it more often, I guess is what way it comes across.
All right. I think there's a question from Claire Roberts in the Q&A. And she says, Claire, do you feel you are writing about wilderness from a different place now than when you were for your first collection? And I'll expand that to say, Robert, this is your third book. So after Claire's answered, if you could answer a sort of a like, hey, this is my third book. What is my process like now? Kind of question. So
Sure.
Claire?
Sure. So I think with my first book, I was looking, like I was really interested in all these different weird animal stories, or like different films and anecdotes I'd read, and I was kind of bringing all of these together under this idea that my first book's called Invasive Species, and it's this, a lot of it is about this idea of, you know, who is the invader, and how do we connect with animals and nature, and how do we kind of put up walls between ourselves and the natural world. And that definitely expanded, that way of thinking and breaking down those kind of barriers definitely expanded into my thinking for the second book. But I really wanted to dig into my own personal experiences in the outdoors. As was mentioned in my bio, I had this incredible opportunity to spend a few months in Dawson City doing the Burton House residency. And I mean, Dawson itself feels very wild in a lot of ways. You're really right next to kind of the forest, the river's right there. But I was also able to get out into do a few, Grizzly Lake Trail, that is a real place in Tombstone Park. Anyway, sorry to get long-winded, but during the writing of this book, I had a lot more experiences in nature that kind of informed it and caused me to reflect back on other experiences I'd had in my life in the outdoors. And also being in the Yukon, I had all this access to these amazing memoirs and first-person accounts of women who'd come to the gold rush. And that kind of sparked a lot of the ideas for writing about women in wilderness settings.
Okay, I should jump right in then. Okay, that was excellent. How has my process changed? Well, I think about form more than I used to. I'm fascinated by different formal forms of poetry, and I've explored a lot of that in the last few years. And I think I threw out a lot more writing this book than I did with my first two, in terms of just letting go of poems that just wouldn't work, and I couldn't really defend for a manuscript. So I was a little bit more ruthless in that respect as well. And taking the time. Like, it took 8 years to get this out, and that was fine. There's no rush as long as you can get a better work than the first couple times around. So yeah.
Was this the first time that your work sort of seeped or leached, to use industrial language, into your poems? I mean,
Yeah.
it was sort of mossing over, or you know, the edges.
Yeah, it really, I mean, the industrial, especially metalworking, there's such an amazing language that you experience. Like, it's a different vocabulary, like any job is. And I just became fascinated by that, and fascinated by the struggle of these people who feel like they're not seen in the outside world. They feel like they work in these suburban shells, especially in the Toronto area, where you just don't see industry, even though it's there. And yet they had stories to tell, and just fascinating languages to explore in a poetic way that I felt would work. Yeah.
Are you known around your workplace as the poet?
I try not to really trumpet that, really. So people know. They've heard a couple of the poems, but yeah. Don't like to foist that on people too often.
Yeah. I mean, I get that. Claire, you work in publishing. So is being a poet your dirty little secret?
It's no secret at all. It is funny though, like I do find being sort of in both the writer and the editor role kind of like wearing two different hats, or having two different identities, even though they're very closely linked, and you know, both give me perspectives on each other. It sometimes does feel like I'm like stepping in between these two roles.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I mean, and I work in publishing as my day job, and so it's kind of odd sometimes. And Robert, your bio said that you were editor of trade publications.
Yeah.
So we're all using all those same skills in some ways at work and at home. But I always find it funny because, publishers are human, and making books and magazines is like, it's a struggle sometimes, right? Like, you're trying to make something that's really human and really hard and really complex. And sometimes you have that like author chatter, like, oh, the author's being such a pain. And then you're like, I'm an author. They're not pains. They're just wanting the best for their books, right? So it's that,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's that funny push and pull. But yeah. So, what was I going to say? Should we open it up for another question? I think Clea, who has been a remarkable purveyor of questions, has said, she asked another question. It was, Rob, what is your approach when you set out to write an ekphrastic poem? And if people don't know, ekphrasis is where, like with that Lowry poem that he read, where you write poetry that addresses an artwork or in another form. Traditionally, it was sort of painting and sculpture. So, Rob,
Sure.
do you want to talk to that?
Sure. Yeah. It's really more often that the poem, the painting asks me to write about it. Like I started my last book with an ekphrastic poem about Jack Chambers painting, and this one with Gerhard Richter. It's basically for whatever reason the painting demands that I address it. So there's never really. Usually a first line comes from it. Basically, a first line will pop into my head that relates to that painting, and I just go from there. That's what happened with the Richter. Certainly in this case, I was just sitting in bed, and the painting all of a sudden was in front of me in my mind, and the line was there, and just went from there. It was nice because I've loved that painting for years. I mean, I went to University of McGill like over 20 years ago, and I would just go there and stare at it, and suddenly it had its purpose. So yeah, that's been it.
When you're blocked, do you ever sneak into museums, hopefully with your notebook? You're like, yeah, I'm ready.
You know what? I think I do actually. I never take a notebook with when I'm in that sort of state, but I do like to see other types of art when I don't feel like I can write. I just go into either reading other books or going to the gallery, or especially the AGO. I love the AGO. So yeah, that's usually what I do to try to get the pistons moving again.
The pistons. Claire, I don't want to ask you about your pistons because that's rude. But have you ever worked with ekphrasis? Or I know you've worked with other forms as well, but have you ever specifically, I can't remember, that's terrible, I should know this, but have you specifically worked with ekphrasis?
Yes. There was at least, I think, one poem in my first book. I'm actually also terrible because I'm like, did that poem make it into the book? I think it did. Based on a painting also in the AGO by Ariel Gordon, I believe. But also, in Gold Rush, I have a poem that's dedicated to Tom Thompson, and it's not necessarily ekphrastic, but it is reflecting on his sort of legacy and the way he paints and the contents of his work, and how that has shaped, how we see places like Algonquin Park in the sort of collective imagination, and in my own personal relationship with that area. So, yeah.
All right, so there's one more question in the Q&A. Oh, Clea, purveyor of questions. Rob, do you feel differently about a painting after you've written about it? So basically what she's asking is, do paintings become ex-girlfriends after you've written about them?
Well, that sounds really negative. Actually, it's more just that I understand why I like it so much. better. I all of a sudden I basically walk through my love of that painting and see it in a deeper way. I mean, the Richter, I mean, it's just a sort of it's a hill on the countryside that's sort of blurry, and it looks like it's like the color of grass right before us, before a really big rainstorm. It's just oof. But I never really delved into why I loved it so much, and this gave it more meaning to me. Absolutely.
Claire, the crowd, the mass, the clot of people in the chat wants to know what you think about that too. They also want to hear the Tom Thompson poem. But I'm not going to let Claire read that poem until we have a request for another final closing out poem from Robert too. So for those of you that have read the book, you're on the spot, pick something. But in the meantime, Claire, answer the how do you feel about paintings after you've written about them?
I think I'd have a pretty similar answer. Like, yeah, it helps to articulate what it is about a painting that moves you or that makes you feel a certain way. And yeah, I think I'm now just remembering too another poem from my first collection that was also based on a painting. I don't think it lives at the AGO, but I saw it at the AGO by David Blackwood, I think his name is. He's a East Coast painter. But I think it also, it connects you to the work in a different way, because whatever was kind of going on with you at that time becomes kind of embedded in your feeling towards that painting. So now I can't look at some paintings, if I've written about them, without thinking about what went into that poem and how I was feeling at the time and all of that. So it's kind of an interesting back and forth in a way.
Yeah, and you almost don't have to like a painting to write about it, right? You can write in opposition to things or to ideas, and that's just as generative as liking. I almost think not liking something or being bothered by something in some ways can be more generative than just admiring something.
Yeah,
totally.
All right, now I'm still looking for a poem request for Rob. Come on, chat, don't fail me now. Claire, do you want to read yours? And then and which
Sure.
page? I need to know the page number.
It is on, I need to find it. It is on page 23.
23, okay.
And it is called Canoe Lake for Tom Thompson. Water goosed by palette knife, rocks with a few more years licked off. I'm sure you get this a lot. Girls who stretched like birches around your grave, each summer a smudge of pine and sapphire, grapefruit sky. A canoe in every frame. 10 Augusts for me to see this place wasn't blank before you. That time is more paddle than paintbrush. Your ghost, the only one we knew how to look for. That shimmer of linseed oil at twilight, swelling into boat and body, loon, gliding right on through.
Nice.
All right, let me just see if there's one more. No. Okay, so, we have a last, it just came in. This is like reading a teletype. Oh, the news has just arrived. Can Rob read Interview with the Machinist?
Interview with the Machinist. Okay, sure.
And
love that poem.
Just before you start, Amy Parrott Dunn, who is the long-suffering and talented publisher at Palimpsest, wrote, "Can you let everyone know that Palimpsest is still shipping books that are ordered from the website if they can't get the book at their local store?" And they hit the post office hard once a week right now. I have to say there are lots of bookstores that are still open. I know that McNally Robinson will ship across the country right now for I think it's like $8 in shipping, and they are able to order from distributors, so they should be able to get everything even if they don't have it in store. So that's another one. I think there are lots of things closer to you, Ontario bookstores. I don't know what they are, but there's lots of them and they're still shipping books. All right, read your poem.
All right. So if you want the orange, if you need some more orange in your life, there you go. But interview with the machinist. He knows you have forgotten the first breath, the blood, and the cut cord. Ask him. He could give you that scream, the blade-freed shape. He worries his clocks on commas, hyphens of steel, bared bones and muscle intuited in edge and thread. Ask your questions. He shakes his head, unable to conjure an airplane whole, the haunches of an automobile, a patriotic engine chugging a soft shoe. He's rehearsed money, hours, margins, but thinks in the shape of the thing that is nameless until it is freed. His no words turned clean in piecework births.
Beautiful.
Wow.
So does anybody, I think unless either of you have any denouncements you'd like to make or disavowments, I think we're getting close to done. I just want to remind people that if they want to raise their hand and say their question out loud, if Jim Johnstone would like to say something, he could do it that way. I'm just thinking that he could, or not, but that option is here. So I'm giving you a few seconds to raise your hand. Do we have any hand raising?
I don't see any.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It was so
Okay.
lovely. That was great. I
That
love
was
that.
so wonderful. Lovely
Thank you
work,
so much.
guys.
Thank you very much for
So
having us
great.
tonight. It's
Mhm.
fantastic.
And Ariel, you are an amazing host. She will be hosting again, so make sure you come back, everyone.
Sounds like I've got
And
a poetry transmitted disease, but yes.
a poet, there's a title for something. Thank you everyone for coming. Claire and Rob for reading your wonderful work, Ariel for hosting. I really appreciate it, and it's just been a really lovely way to spend this evening.
Thank you so much.
Agreed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. It's
Thank
always
you.
so awkward, the end part. What do we do now? Can't go out for a drink, unfortunately. Maybe
Very
another time.
sadly.
Yes.
Very sadly.
Okay. I will,
Okay, bye.
I'll just hang out here and let people go and make sure that we capture the chat. So you guys can take off and I'll get the chat. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.